A young nurse rescues a man from a frozen lake. Turns out he is a billionaire. He does the unbelievable. Emma, a 22-year-old nurse, was off shift that evening. She had just finished a grueling 12-hour rotation at the hospital, one that had left her emotionally and physically drained. A quiet jog along the trail near Crescent Lake was her ritual escape. Her earbuds buzzed with soft instrumental music as she followed the trail curving gently around the lake. Snow crunched under her sneakers, and her breath came out in little clouds. She had gone nearly a mile when something disrupted the rhythm, a sound that didn't belong. A cry. Faint. Fragile. Almost easy to ignore. She stopped. At first, she thought she'd imagined it. The wind was deceptive out here. Sometimes it moaned like voices. She pulled out her earbuds. There it was again, a desperate, muffled shout. A splash. A scream. Emma's pulse spiked. She darted toward the edge of the lake, eyes scanning the horizon. And then she saw it, movement beneath the ice about 30 feet from shore. A flailing hand. A head. A man, trapped beneath the surface. The lake had frozen over 2 weeks ago, but warm weather that afternoon had thinned the surface. He must have stepped onto a fragile patch. Emma didn't think. She moved. She tore off her coat, dropped her phone, and ran onto the lake. The ice groaned with every step, splintering like thin glass under her weight. One misstep, and she could fall through too, but she didn't stop. Adrenaline pushed her forward. 5 feet. 10. The man's movement slowed. He was slipping under. She dropped to her knees near the cracked edge and reached into the freezing water. Her arm vanished into the dark, numb almost instantly. Her fingers found his jacket, then his wrist. She gripped it tight and pulled. "Hold on," she screamed. He didn't respond. Bracing one foot behind her, she yanked with every ounce of strength in her body. The ice cracked further. Her leg plunged into freezing water. She cried out but didn't let go. Finally, his torso broke through the surface, slick with freezing water and blue with cold. She wrapped both arms around him and dragged him inch by inch until they were both lying on the solid ice. They weren't safe yet. He wasn't breathing. Emma leaned over his chest, her soaked hair sticking to her cheeks, and began chest compressions. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on." She tilted his head, pinched his nose, and gave 2 quick breaths. Her lungs burned. Her hands trembled. Again, compressions. "Breathe." Again. And then he coughed. A violent, guttural gasp tore through his chest, water spilling from his mouth. His eyes fluttered, unfocused. He was alive. Emma let out a sob she didn't know she'd been holding. She pulled him into a sitting position and wrapped her coat around him, clutching his cold body close to her own. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Someone must have called when they saw the fall. "You're okay," she whispered. "You're safe. Just hold on." His lips moved, but no sound came out. They stayed like that, soaked, shaking, breath fogging the frozen air, as red and blue lights reflected across the trees. Snow fell softly outside the hospital window, blanketing the world in white. It was the kind of snow that muted all sound, turned chaos into calm. Inside the hospital, however, the rhythm remained constant. Nurses moving briskly, machines humming steadily, and the ever-present scent of antiseptic in the air. Emma pushed open the door to room 207, coffee in hand, heart caught in that strange place between nervous and hopeful. It had been nearly 24 hours since the rescue. Since she dragged a man from beneath the frozen lake and breathed life back into him with her bare hands. He hadn't woken up yet. The room was dim, illuminated only by the muted glow of the heart monitor and the weak winter light filtering through the blinds. The man lay motionless in the bed, chest rising and falling slowly, as though he was suspended somewhere between this world and the next. His face was peaceful, unfamiliar, yet already etched into her memory. What hair had dried and curled slightly at the ends. His lips were pale, but no longer blue. Wires ran from his chest to machines, monitoring vitals. And 4 bag hung above him, slowly dripping life back into his veins. Emma approached quietly, as though afraid to disturb him. A nurse walked in behind her, clipboard in hand. "Still no ID?" Emma asked in a whisper. The nurse shook her head. "Nothing. No wallet. No phone. Not even a key." "What about his clothes?" Emma glanced at the neatly folded items sitting on a sterile table in the corner. Tailored coat. Designer boots. And that watch. The nurse nodded toward the man's belongings. "Custom. Probably worth more than my car." Emma's brows knit together. So he's someone important. Or at least, someone rich. The nurse's tone wasn't judgmental, just factual. But the words lingered in the air like perfume. Someone rich. But no one knew who he was. The mystery clung to him, wrapping around his unconscious body like a shroud. Emma moved to the chair beside the bed and sat down, setting her coffee on the floor. She reached out hesitantly, brushing her fingers along the blanket near his hand, not touching, but close. She studied him for a moment in silence. "I don't even know your name," she said softly, voice barely louder than a breath. "But I know you've got a second chance. Most people don't get that." She paused. "You could have died out there. I didn't even think. I just ran in. I didn't care who you were. I still don't." The heart monitor beeped steadily. She leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on his peaceful face. "Whatever your story is, wherever you came from, it doesn't matter. What matters is what you do now. You've got a second chance. Don't waste it." A silence followed, thick, reverent. Then she sat back and exhaled slowly, her breath catching in the stillness. Over the next 2 days, Emma returned to the room each time she was on break. Nurses started to nod knowingly when she passed. She was that girl, the one who saved the frozen man. She didn't mind. The hospital was her world, and even when she wasn't working, she felt tethered to this stranger. She couldn't explain it. Maybe it was guilt. What if he didn't wake up? Maybe it was duty. She had started this. She had to see it through. Or maybe, deep down, it was curiosity. Who was he? And what had he been doing alone on a frozen lake? Each visit was the same. The room was still. The man didn't move. But Emma would sit beside him, read a few pages of whatever book was in her bag, or talk to him in quiet tones. Her words weren't elaborate. Sometimes she told him about her shift. Other times she'd simply talk about the snow, or the smell of cinnamon rolls from the bakery across the street. She just didn't want him to feel alone, in case somewhere, buried deep in his mind, he could still hear. Then, on the morning of the third day, something changed. Emma arrived early, a few minutes before her shift. Her hair was tucked under a knit hat, cheeks pink from the cold. She cradled her coffee as she pushed open the door to room 207, expecting the same scene. But this time, the air felt different. She paused. His head had turned slightly. Just a fraction. Emma stepped closer. Then, his eyelids fluttered. Her breath caught in her throat. "Hey," she whispered, barely daring to believe what she saw. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, flickering as though adjusting to the light. Then they landed on her. Clear, sharp, intense, and full of questions. She leaned closer, her heart pounding. "Can you hear me?" He blinked once. Then again. His throat moved as he tried to speak, but no sound came. "Take it easy," she said gently. "You've been unconscious for 3 days." He licked his lips and swallowed, voice emerging as a gravelly whisper. "Where?" "You're at Crestview Hospital," she replied. "You fell through the ice at Crescent Lake." A pause. He managed. "You pulled me out." She nodded, a small, uncertain smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Yeah, that was me." His eyes locked onto hers again, this time not with confusion, but something deeper. Gratitude. Awe. Vulnerability. "You saved me." The words were so soft they could have been mistaken for wind. But Emma heard them, felt them. "I guess I did," she said, her voice cracking slightly. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, charged. He looked down at his hands, for lines trailing from the back of his wrist. Then back at her. "You stayed," he said. She smiled. "I guess I did." Doctors and nurses rushed in a few minutes later. There were tests to run, scans to perform. Emma stepped back, giving them space, watching as they swarmed the man she had dragged from death. He didn't take his eyes off her as they examined him, even as they asked him questions, flashlights in his pupils, checked reflexes. "What's your name, sir?" the attending physician asked. The man was quiet. Emma leaned forward slightly. "I don't know," he said at last. The room stilled. "You don't remember?" He shook his head, slowly. "Nothing. Just the lake. The cold. Then her face." He looked at Emma again. "She pulled me out." Hours passed. Tests showed no sign of permanent damage. The doctors called it transient global amnesia, possibly caused by trauma, hypoxia, or extreme shock. The memory might return, or it might not. He remained calm through all of it. Curiously calm. Emma found herself drawn back to his room during her lunch break, standing in the doorway, unsure if she was intruding. "You can come in," he said, his voice stronger now. She did. He was sitting up in bed, dressed in a hospital gown, his dark hair brushed back. The roughness was gone, replaced by a sharp, intelligent gaze. Despite his condition, he seemed composed. "Do you really not remember anything?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Just images. Flashes. A city skyline. Someone laughing. But it all slips away." Emma pulled the chair closer. He studied her as she sat her day. "What's your name?" "Emma. Emma Lewis." "Emma," he repeated, like he was trying to make it permanent. "And you don't remember yours?" "No." He gave a small smile. "Any guesses?" She smiled back. "Well, the nurses have been calling you Mr. Mystery." He laughed, a low, warm sound that startled them both. "Well, Miss Lewis," he said, tilting his head, "thank you for saving Mr. Mystery's life." That night, as she walked home beneath a falling snow, Emma's heart felt heavy and light at the same time. The man she'd rescued, the stranger with no name, was awake, alive, and looking at her like she was the only steady thing in a world he didn't recognize. But she knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. The next morning, the hospital corridors were oddly quiet, blanketed in that peculiar stillness that comes right before the shift changes. Emma walked in with her usual thermos of lukewarm tea, her ID badge clipped to her chest, and her thoughts already drifting toward room 207. The man with no name had begun speaking in full sentences yesterday. He'd remembered nothing, no address, no family, no profession, but he'd remembered her. He'd thanked her again, with a kind of rawness that lingered in her chest long after she left. Part of her had hoped that today would bring more answers, maybe a name, a glimpse into the life he'd lived before the ice, before the cold. But when she reached room 207, it was empty. Fresh sheets, blank monitors, no personal belongings. No signs that he had ever been there. Emma stared at the vacant bed, blinking slowly. She stepped inside, as if he might still be hiding in the corner, or maybe in the hallway, chatting with a nurse. But there was nothing. No goodbye note, no forwarding contact, no message of thanks scrawled on the bedside chart. She checked with the front desk, asked if he had been moved or discharged. "He checked out first thing this morning," the woman behind the counter said, not looking up. "Didn't want transportation. Walked out on his own." Emma paused. "Did he leave a name?" "Nope." A shrug. "He said he had somewhere to be. Signed out as John Doe." "We see it more often than you'd think." Emma stood still for a moment, the words hanging in the air like dust motes. Then she offered a polite smile, murmured a thank you, and turned away. As she walked back down the hall, something unspoken twisted in her chest. She told herself it didn't matter. People left all the time. Some didn't want to be found. Some just needed a clean break. And maybe that was all he needed. Still, she had expected something. Even a scribbled note on a napkin. "Thank you. Be well." Anything. That night, the wind whistled through the gaps in Emma's apartment windows, rattling them gently as the radiator clicked and clanked with its usual protest. Her small apartment was warm but quiet, filled only with the soft hum of city life outside. She sat at the kitchen table, cupping a mug of chamomile tea, letting the steam rise and kiss her cheeks. The kettle still sat on the stove, and the light above the sink buzzed faintly. A book lay open beside her, one she'd been trying to finish for weeks, but she hadn't turned the page in 20 minutes. Her mind kept circling back to the image of the empty hospital bed. Why hadn't he said goodbye? It shouldn't have mattered. She'd done her part. She had seen someone in danger, acted on instinct, and saved a life. That was what nurses did. It wasn't about thanks. It wasn't about recognition. It was about compassion, service, and moving forward. But this felt different. Not because she wanted something from him, but because it felt unfinished. Like a song cut off mid-chorus. Like a door left half open. She exhaled and stared at her tea. Maybe he was overwhelmed. Maybe he truly didn't remember who he was and needed space to figure it out. Or maybe he did remember, and that was exactly why he left. Some people disappear because they're lost. Others disappear because they've finally been found, and it scares them. She rested her chin on her hand, watching the city lights blink through the curtain slats. Car horns echoed faintly in the distance. Somewhere in the building, someone was laughing. Life moved on, as it always did. Emma leaned back and closed her eyes. Sometimes, you save a life, and that's it. You don't get closure. You don't get answers. Sometimes, you just act, Give all of yourself in a single moment, and then walk away, never knowing what your impact was. Maybe he was grateful in his own way. Maybe disappearing was his version of protecting her from who he really was or what came with him. Still, part of her hoped she'd see him again. Not for romance, not for recognition, but because he'd started to feel like something more than just a stranger. He had been a mystery, a patient, a blank page. And now he was a memory. Faint, but persistent. She reached for the book again, turned the page this time, and tried to let the words pull her away. But as she read, her fingers traced the edge of her mug absent-mindedly, eyes flickering to the front door every so often, as if it might open. It didn't. She went back to work the next day, and the next. She stopped asking about him. She returned to her routine, early shifts, late nights, the blur of patient charts and beeping monitors. The world didn't stop because one man walked away. But every now and then, in the quiet between emergencies, her mind would wander. To his eyes when he first woke up. To the way he said her name, Emma, as if it mattered more than he could explain. To the stillness in his goodbye, even if he hadn't said it aloud. And though she told herself she would never see him again, the story was far from over. Because just beyond the horizon of her ordinary life, something extraordinary was still waiting. And so was he. The sky was still the shade of early morning steel when Emma stirred from sleep, her small apartment cloaked in the silence that came just before the city truly woke. Her alarm hadn't gone off yet, but something pulled her from her dreams. A soft hum outside her window, the sound of a car engine idling too smoothly for her neighborhood. She blinked the sleep from her eyes, stretched, and shuffled to the window. There, parked at the curb, was a sleek black car. The kind of car no one drove around here unless they were very, very lost or very, very intentional. A suited man stepped out, tall and sharp, like he'd walked straight off the cover of a business magazine. He looked up at her building, then down at a small envelope in his hand. A chill ran down Emma's spine. This wasn't coincidence. The doorbell rang. Emma hesitated for a breath, then pulled on her robe and padded softly to the door. She opened it just a crack, peering out with cautious eyes. The man gave a small, polite nod. "Miss Emma Clark?" "Yes. This is for you." He held out the envelope with both hands, as though handing over something sacred, from someone who owes you his life. Before she could ask anything, he turned and walked back to the car. She stood there for a long moment, envelope in hand, watching the vehicle disappear into the city haze. Back inside, her hands trembled slightly as she peeled open the thick, cream-colored paper. The stationery was heavy, elegant. The kind you didn't buy at the corner store. Inside was a handwritten letter, penned in rich black ink, the words flowing in smooth, confident strokes. She sat slowly, her legs weak beneath her, and began to read. "Emma, I've spent most of my life avoiding the public eye, building empires behind curtains, letting others take the credit while I stayed hidden in the shadows. I never imagined that the moment I'd be truly seen would be lying under the ice, helpless, watching a stranger fight to pull me back into the light. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't hesitate. You simply acted. My name is Nicholas Vale. You may have heard of me, but I assure you, the world knows only fragments. The real me? I owe that version of myself to you. No amount of money could ever repay what you did. But let this be a beginning. $10 million has been transferred to your account as a token, nothing more than a reflection of my gratitude. Not because I think you need it, but because people like you, selfless, brave, unseen, deserve to be reminded of their worth. I hope this gift gives you the freedom to do whatever your heart calls you toward. And should you ever wish to speak again, my door is open. Forever grateful, Nicholas Vale." Emma read the letter twice. 3 times. Her heart pounded as if it had forgotten how to beat steadily. She stared at the bottom of the letter, where his signature curled into a final flourish. Nicholas Vale. That name echoed in her mind like the tail end of a piano note in an empty hall. She didn't know much about billionaires, didn't read Forbes, didn't care for gossip. But even she had heard whispers about him. The elusive tech tycoon, the ghost of Silicon Valley, the man behind some of the most advanced medical software in the world. She reached for her phone, her fingers clumsy as she opened her banking app. A string of numbers appeared on the screen that made her eyes blur. $10 million. Real. Cleared. Sitting quietly in her account as though it belonged there. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Her knees buckled slightly, and she dropped into the nearest chair. It wasn't the money that overwhelmed her. It was the gesture. Someone had seen her, really seen her, not just as a nurse, not as a woman who worked late shifts and lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment, but as someone who had made a difference. She didn't rescue him for recognition. She didn't hesitate because she wanted anything in return. But now this changed everything. She sat for what felt like hours, the letter clutched in one hand, the other resting against the cool edge of the envelope. She thought of all the things that money could do. Student loans, gone. Her mom's overdue medical bills, paid. Maybe a better apartment. Maybe grad school. Or a clinic of her own someday. But beyond all that, it offered her something she hadn't had in years. Choice. Freedom. Possibility. Her heart swelled with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The city moved on outside her window. Buses rumbled by. A neighbor's dog barked. Life resumed. But inside Emma's apartment, everything had changed. She got up and made tea with shaking hands. Her kitchen, once too small, now seemed filled with invisible doors waiting to open. She looked again at the letter on her table, and for the first time since that icy night at the lake, she smiled. Not because of the money, but because someone believed in her, and they left her a gift that said, "I see you." And maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. By Saturday afternoon, Emma found herself in the backseat of a quiet black town car, winding through tree-lined roads on the outskirts of the city. The chaos of downtown had faded away, replaced by open fields and quiet hills. The car came to a stop before a wrought iron gate that creaked open at their arrival. Willowmere Estate sat nestled in a grove of old oaks, the kind of place where time slowed down. The grounds were manicured yet wild, with a garden that stretched toward the lake like it had grown there on its own terms. Nicholas was waiting for her by the water. He wore no suit this time, just a gray sweater, dark jeans, and a softness in his expression that surprised her. "Emma," he said, rising from a stone bench beneath a willow tree. "You came." "I almost didn't," she admitted. Her voice caught somewhere between curiosity and awe. "But I needed to know why." He gestured for her to sit beside him. The lake shimmered behind them, the surface glassy and calm. A few birds called in the distance. It felt sacred somehow, this quiet space between them. "I wasn't just drowning in that lake," Nicholas said after a moment. "I was drowning long before. Burnout. Isolation. Building something so big I couldn't even see it anymore." She listened, silent. "When I went under," he continued, "I thought, maybe it was easier that way. To just let go." Emma turned toward him, brows furrowed. "And then you came," he said, voice quieter now. "You didn't hesitate. You gave a stranger the chance to live again. That moment, your courage, it woke something in me. Reminded me that life isn't supposed to be lived in retreat." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. "I want to start a foundation. One that funds and supports emergency medical infrastructure in places that are overlooked. Rural towns, remote clinics, places without enough hands or hearts." He opened the folder and handed it to her. Inside were blueprints, mission statements, a global vision that stretched far beyond donations. "I don't want you to just be a name on the wall," he said. "I want you to help lead it, build it, shape it. Not because you saved me, but because I've seen the way you act when no one's looking. That's who I want beside me." Emma blinked, her breath catching. "I'm just a nurse," she whispered. "No," he said. "You're the reason I'm here. And I think the world could use more of that." She looked out across the lake, the same kind of stillness now holding her heart. The ripples reached the shore like a quiet promise. And for the first time, she didn't feel like life was happening to her. She felt like she was being invited to something greater, something just beginning. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the boardroom, casting warm streaks across the polished hardwood floor. Emma stood at the head of the long table, her posture calm but firm, the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place in the room. Behind her, a digital screen displayed a map dotted with red, yellow, and green markers, representing dozens of clinics across underserved regions of the world. "We're not just building facilities," she said, her voice clear. "We're building trust, local partnerships, emergency care where there was none before. This is about human lives, not just numbers." She watched as heads nodded around the table. Doctors, field coordinators, global health specialists. They were listening, really listening, and that still stunned her sometimes. Months ago, Emma had been a nurse barely making ends meet. Her life had been a cycle of double shifts, emergency rooms, sleepless nights, and budgeting groceries down to the cent. She never imagined she'd find herself here, standing in a sleek boardroom, leading a global initiative as co-director of the Vail Foundation. Yet here she was, transformed by a single, courageous moment she hadn't thought twice about at the time. Her office was just down the hall. It wasn't flashy, Emma had insisted on keeping it simple. But beside her desk hung a single framed photo, the frozen lake. The very one where her life had changed. She'd taken the picture a week after the rescue, returning alone, unsure of why. The lake had been silent, still, glistening under a soft winter sun. It reminded her that life could shift direction in the blink of an eye. That moment, the plunge into the ice, the desperate CPR, the quiet breath that returned to the stranger, was always with her. Not as a dramatic memory, but as a quiet truth. She thought often of Nicholas Vail. Not the billionaire from the headlines, but the man she'd pulled from the water. He was different now, too. Once hidden behind layers of wealth, isolation, and burnout, he had emerged from the accident stripped of all that noise. These days, Nicholas preferred being in the background. He came to meetings, listened closely, contributed thoughtfully, but let her lead. There was no romantic tension between them, no dramatics. Just respect. A bond forged in a moment of raw humanity. Emma's days were filled with travel and purpose. She visited rural clinics in Africa and South America, trained young medics in villages without steady electricity, comforted patients who had never seen a real doctor. She spoke at conferences, not to impress, but to advocate. And everywhere she went, she carried herself with the same grace and grit that had driven her into the ice that night. She rarely thought about the money anymore. The $10 million Nicholas had given her had been used mostly for the foundation's launch. What mattered to her wasn't the wealth, it was the work. It was seeing a child receive care in a place where there had once been nothing but silence. Late one evening, after a long day of strategy meetings, Emma sat in her office alone. The city lights flickered in the distance. She glanced at the frozen lake photo once more, her fingers brushing the edge of the frame. She remembered thinking, as she pulled Nicholas out of the water, that he might not make it. That even if she gave everything, it might not be enough. But it had been. In that single moment, her choice to act had become the seed of a global movement. She smiled quietly to herself, rising to turn off the lights. Some beginnings don't come with fireworks or grand declarations. Sometimes they arrive in the quiet aftermath of a brave choice. And this was only the beginning. The wind was gentle that afternoon, barely rustling the bare branches that lined the path. A year had passed, yet the trail beside the frozen lake looked almost exactly the same, quiet, serene, painted in soft hues of winter light. Snow crunched beneath Emma's boots as she walked slowly, her gloved hands tucked into the pockets of a wool coat. Her breath curled in the cold air, just as it had that night. She paused near the edge of the lake, the same place where the ice had once cracked open and nearly swallowed a manhole. The surface was solid now, untouched, gleaming like glass beneath the pale sky. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring out across the frozen expanse. This place had become sacred to her, not because of tragedy, but because it marked the beginning of everything that followed. That night, she had acted on instinct, never expecting anything in return. She hadn't known his name, hadn't known his story. She only knew that someone needed help, and she was the only one there to give it. Emma let out a soft breath, her eyes misting, not from the cold, but from the memory. A year ago, she had been just another overworked nurse, unnoticed and underpaid, running to the lake on a routine jog to clear her head. In that single moment of chaos, icy water, racing heart, trembling hands performing CPR in the snow, she had stepped into something greater than herself, and everything had changed. Nicholas Vail had walked back into the world with a new vision. She had walked forward into hers. Together, they had built something extraordinary, not for fame or recognition, but for meaning. The Vail Foundation now spanned continents, saving lives in places where help had never arrived before. And Emma, once invisible to the world, had become a leader, a voice, a light. But this moment wasn't about boardrooms or headlines. It was about standing still, about remembering. She stepped closer to the shore, her boots stopping just before the icy edge. The wind lifted her hair gently as she looked down at the frozen surface. She could almost see the shadow beneath the ice, the panic, the fight to save him. The water had been dark and merciless that night, but out of it had come light. A single act, a single moment. That's all it took. A quiet smile crossed Emma's face. She crouched down and placed her gloved hand against the ice. The the cold seeping through but not chilling her spirit. "Thank you," she whispered, not to Nicholas, not to fate, but to the moment itself. To the universe, perhaps, for placing her there at the exact second she needed to be. She rose slowly, taking one last look across the lake. The world felt vast again, but no longer overwhelming. She felt grounded, not by control, but by purpose. The kind that doesn't always come from planning, but from simply doing what's right when the chance arises. As she turned and walked back along the trail, her pace unhurried, the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow across the snow. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed, birds fluttered through bare trees, and the world kept turning. And then came her voice, soft and certain, rising over the scene like a gentle breeze. "Sometimes, life gives you one chance to make a difference. And sometimes, that one moment changes everything, not just for someone else, but for you." If you enjoyed this story about Emma, the courageous young nurse, and Nicholas Vale, the reclusive billionaire whose life was forever changed by her selfless act, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, emotional narratives like this one. We'd love to hear what you think. What are your thoughts on how the story ended? Did Emma's journey move you? Did Nicholas's transformation feel real and meaningful? What would you have done in Emma's place that night at the frozen lake? Drop your rating for the story on a scale of 1 to 10 in the comments. Be honest, we're here to grow and improve. Also, tell us where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel and connect with people from all around the world. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes one moment of courage really can change everything.